What is up everyone, welcome back to another week's video. This week, again responding to a comment, could I do a video on planning a kayak vacation? Yes, I can, and I do have some thoughts that I've written down here that I want to share with you on taking kayak vacations. I've been very fortunate in my life to have been on a lot, some very successful, some not successful, some semi-successful, and I've definitely learned some lessons along the way, and I've got a couple of things, thoughts to share about this topic. But before I start, I do want to acknowledge the kind of COVID-19 shaped elephant in the room, in that the future of travel, like it has been, especially since I've been traveling, so like the last 10 years, is probably going to look quite different in the next 5 years, I imagine. I expect we will see more consolidation of airlines as they run on, like, most of them run already on kind of thin margins, so I expect some of them will go under and bigger ones will buy smaller ones. And I think if we have to continue this like social distancing thing where we're at now for a prolonged period of time, it's going to be challenging for a lot of planes to run, at least with the kind of cheap-ish flights that we've been used to. I read an article on BBC News not too long ago that kind of predicted tickets could go up by as between 50% or higher, which would make some trips that seem pretty cheap seem more expensive, and it makes some trips that were expensive already seem really expensive. So with that in mind, I'm going to tell you what I can tell you now, kind of based on my experience and some things I've encountered, at least, or some things I wish I knew. But I think it is worth just being aware that this might all change, this situation where we're able to like jet off once a year or twice a year, or you know, however much it is, to go on these cool kayaking trips. That might look very different in the future, and we just don't know yet. So I hope for the best, but also always kind of being planned for the worst, just in case it does come to that. But moving on to the topic at hand, how to plan a whitewater kayaking holiday, vacation, trip. So the first thing you got to think about is, where are you interested in going? And if you're not sure, great places of inspiration: YouTube, it's out there, Instagram, it's out there. Find some things you're like, oh, that looks really cool, I'd like to check that out. If you figured out roughly where you want to go to, the next thing to figure out is when best to go. And one of the best ways to figure out when best to go is to look around and see if there is a guidebook for that location or country that you're interested in getting into. For example, Chile is a really good one. For a while there, in England at least, it was kind of tricky to get hold of the guidebook, and then more became available. But guidebooks are out there, and they give you a wealth of knowledge, usually not just on the rivers you're going to, but also like what time of year is best to go, what to expect in terms of temperature, in terms of the different paddling styles you might be getting into, and the different paddling options that there are available. And buying a guidebook is like a really low investment way to see if that trip's going to be a good fit for you or not, because you might end up getting into something that is not what you're looking for necessarily. And so by getting a guidebook, normally it will have information like when's best to go and what to expect and how much roughly things cost in whatever country you're going to. Don't be over dependent on YouTube videos and on Facebook posts, because they don't always give the full story that a guidebook can. And that being said, don't be dependent on a guidebook, because you know, things change since it gets printed. But guidebooks are a really great way to start off your research project, and that's the way you have to look at planning a kayak trip. Is like you have to do a little bit of research on where you want to go, right? And then you can find out when's best to go, and then you can also use that as your starting point for other resources. So once you've read through the guidebook and you've got an idea a bit more about the geography of the country, so like whereabouts you're going to be paddling or where you think you're going to be going to, that's going to lead to a number of other things on your kind of where are we going to, and that might set you up better for doing further research on when you're going and where you're actually going to. So if, for example, if it's somewhere you have to fly into, a country might have a number of big airports, and you're going to have to pick which one is going to be logistically best fit for you. And quite often the guidebook's actually going to tell you that, which is really useful. So I'm pretty pro guidebook. I think if there is one for where you're going, it's worth checking out. That being said, they're not always the most useful thing. One of the very first kayak trips I ever went on was to Mexico, and at the time Mexico wasn't a really popular kayak destination. It was back in 2011. A lot of people did not go there, or they viewed it as a very dangerous place to go, and the guidebook was released in 92 and I went in 2011, so the guidebook was already like kind of out of date, you know, like there was a lot of new things that happened in Mexico since that guidebook came out, so it was a good starting off point to give some ideas, but also it wasn't like I couldn't trust it 100% for every single thing, right? But for your start of your information researching when you're going on a trip, guidebooks are like one of the best places to start. Alright everyone, editor's notes here. Just while I'm editing this, it occurs to me I forgot to mention a couple of things here. Another great option if you are pressed for time is guided trips. They can be a really good way to get a lot of kayaking done in a short amount of time without wasting a lot of time messing around with logistics and with having to think about where you're going and what you're doing. You're basically paying for someone who knows that area better than you to tell you what's going to be good and what's not going to be good and get you there and figure out the logistics for you. It can take a lot of the headaches out of travel to kayak, and if you're on a short time budget, it's something I do highly recommend. Shop around. There's lots of different companies usually in countries that have guided trips, so make sure you're getting a company that's a good fit for you and for what your skill level is and also what your goals are for that trip, and you can have a really good experience with guided trips, so I do recommend that. Okay, back to it. Next thing I like to think about in kayaking trip planning, kayak trip planning. Next thing I like to think about is who are you going to be going with and what are your team's expectations / goals and / budgets, and are they all aligned? Because there's nothing worse than kind of loosely planning a trip with someone who's expecting something to be way more chill or way less chill than you're looking for, and then it kind of creates a friction dynamic that's going to make your trip a lot less enjoyable. So ideally, you're going to be going with a few people, maybe who you know well, maybe who don't know that well, but make sure you talk about it and be open up front before you get to where you're going, to make sure that everyone's kind of on the same page about what they're looking for in this trip, because people might just naturally have different goals, and it's okay to have different goals, that's cool, but it's going to make your trip go a lot better. You're going to have a much more pleasant and enjoyable experience if the people you're on a trip with have similar expectations to yourself. And so yeah, who you go with, and in some ways I think I didn't used to think this way, but as I've got older I start to think this way. In some ways I think who you're going with is actually more important than where you're going, because if you're with people you like spending time with, it won't matter if you're like suffering or if you're on a 24-hour bus ride or if you're just not getting to go kayaking, because you know everything's kind of stacking up against you, because you'll still be having fun. But if you're kind of getting to one of those situations where things just start not quite going the way you want them to go, and you're with people you don't really like spending time with, that can just kind of compound on top of each other and make your experience less enjoyable. And I think that's just really important to be aware of, like who you're going with is going to have a huge impact on your trip. So once you've got your who and your where kind of figured out, another good thing to think about, as well as guidebook, we talked about guidebooks a lot so far, another good thing to think about is check on if there's any foreign office travel advisories. So whatever your home nation will probably have a foreign office website which has travel advisories, which says gives you more information about the country you're going to, and quite often these are aimed at more general travelers, not specifically kayakers. But if you're going to a country and the foreign office says we do not recommend you travel to this country at that time, that's an indicator that you need to think twice. And it's also going to be an indicator if you do get into an accident or you need help and assistance down the line, maybe your passport gets stolen, on how much help you can expect from the whatever consulate embassy there is there in that country. And you don't want to put yourself in a position where you go somewhere and then your passport gets stolen and then you're like trapped there forever, right? You don't want that to happen to you. So it is worth doing that little extra bit of research, see what the government says, and also see if they recommend for you to go see a travel doctor with regards to like medications that you might need, or pre-inoculations you might want to consider too, and they may be mandatory, like for example yellow fever. You need to have the yellow fever immunization before you go to Uganda, for example, and you have to show your immunization card like right when you get there. And if you don't, then I think you have to pay like $100 or something, and they like jab you up with a needle right there. So to avoid getting jabbed with a needle in an African country, do your research. Like, that's all I'm saying. Just do your homework, and it can make your day a lot more pleasant. It can make your travel trip a lot more enjoyable. Assuming your planning is going quite well, you're now going to be getting into more of like the tactical nitty-gritty. Okay, editor's note 2 here, really important. I can't believe I didn't remember to tell you this early on. You need to have travel insurance. It is imperative that you get sufficient travel insurance that will cover your activities while you're away. In the best case scenario, maybe your bag gets lost on the flight. In the worst case scenario, you're injured and have a huge hospital bill or repatriation costs that you will need to come up with. That is really serious. I always have travel insurance when I travel, and I cannot stress enough how important it is. Even if you think you're going to be fine, sometimes you get it, you have credit cards that offer it, but check that they actually cover the activities you're doing. I don't have one of those, so I always buy separate travel insurance. Sometimes it can be expensive. That's just the price of doing business. Okay, back to it. Like, where are we actually going to exactly? How are you going to get there? Are you going to fly there? If you're flying somewhere, are you going to fly with a kayak, or are you going to rent one there? Is renting one there a possibility? It might be, it might not. If you're flying with a kayak, now you've got to be a bit more careful again, because you want to choose an airline which is going to be more favorable to you getting your kayak on the plane, because that's going to make your whole trip a lot easier, assuming your kayak makes it onto the plane. Some airlines are really good about getting your kayak on, some are not. I've had mixed but mostly good experiences about getting my kayak on a plane. It's a hassle. It's definitely a hassle to travel with your kayak, but that's kind of part of the deal. At some point, lots of countries have places where you can rent kayaks, so it's very possible you can avoid that whole step. But again, you'll find that out in your research for whatever country it is you're looking for. So, plan ahead. And if you do have to fly with a kayak, that's going to put an extra layer of planning onto your trip preparation, right? Because you won't have to look for flights or for carriers which are going to be amenable to you squeaking your kayak on there, or dressing it up and calling it a surfboard, or whatever tactic you're going to use to get it on the plane. There's a couple of really good videos about getting your kayak on a plane. Side note, Bren Orton has one on the senders page, I think. I'll try and link it below. It's that's a really funny one. And then kind of your last tactical things to think about for once you're actually in country, like how you're getting around, where you're going to stay. You'll notice these seem like big things, but they're actually they're pretty low down on the list. If you've done your homework up to that point, it will be obvious what you should be doing, or what the best thing for you to do is, and that might look like renting a truck or renting a vehicle. That might look like bringing camping equipment with you, or planning to stay in hostels and budgeting for that. And again, information is probably going to be in the guidebook, right? So worth checking that out. Maybe worth hitting up your local library and finding like the Lonely Planet travel guide for whatever country you're interested in going to, and just seeing what they've got to say about it. And thinking about if you're going to do some non-kayaking activities while you're on this trip, right? And I don't really do that, but on this last trip I was on in Indonesia before Christmas, I did have some non-kayak days, which was very unusual for me, and I didn't really know what to do with myself a bit, and I wasn't planned ahead for that. So, and I definitely could have got more out of it if I'd planned ahead, like, if I'd spent an extra day on Google before I went. Anyway, digressing. Those are kind of the things to think about for a whitewater kayaking vacation. I'm hesitant. Another comment asked me to kind of figure out what it should cost, and I'm hesitant to put numbers on it. Some trips are cheaper than others. Splitting things like vehicle rentals between 3 or 4 people is usually cheaper than splitting it between 1 or 2. There's other ways you can make trips cheaper or more expensive. It obviously varies significantly country to country as well. And like I said, and I think we do have to acknowledge that the kayak traveling in a post-COVID-19 world maybe is going to look very different. And I do think we just have to be aware that things are going to change, or things could change. Things have the possibility to change. And it's easy to be doom and gloom about that, and I find myself doom and gloom about it pretty often. But, you know, just stay the course and be ready, and if you see an opportunity, take it. And I think the most important thing to remember with kayak traveling is if you want to go somewhere, figure it out and make it happen. No one's going to put it on your plate and say, hey, like, I'm doing this, do you want to come? Or they might do, but mostly I find if I want to go to a place, I'm the one who's going to get on Google and make it happen, and then down the road I'm going to be looking for other people to come with me. But don't wait for someone else. You know, time moves on, so if you don't make it happen, it won't happen. And that's kind of all I've got to say on this subject of planning kayak vacations. Thank you very much for listening, thanks for joining me, and I will see you next week. Peace.